Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I came across an interesting lawyer, a very senior lawyer in Kiev, who has been posting on social media about what's going on, both with her legal business and obviously the war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so I want to introduce you tonight to Yulia Kyrpa. She is the executive partner at AEQUO law firm, a leading law firm in Ukraine, and she's ranked among the top 10 most innovative lawyers by the Financial Times. She's also a board member of an interesting organization called the Register of Damage Caused by Russian Aggression to Ukraine. The Register is established in The Hague as a platform for intergovernmental cooperation, acting within the institutional framework of the Council of Europe. And finally, she's also an independent supervisory board member in a bank, and the name of the bank, I won't try to pronounce it. It's Agro Prosperous Bank in the Ukraine, that is a bank with 100% U.S. capital focused on funding in the agricultural sector. Yulia, welcome to the show.
Brian, good evening. Thank you for inviting me. I am honored to participate in the show. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for this opportunity. So tell me a little bit about where you are. So are you in Kiev right now?
Yes, I'm in Kiev. I work from our offices in Equal firm in Kiev downtown. Right now I'm at home because it's Sunday, but normally I work from Kiev downtown every day.
A lot of us are amazed that life goes on and business goes on in the middle of a war. Tell me what your day-to-day life is like, going from your house to your office. Are there air raid sirens on a fairly regular basis? Are you worried for your safety? Just give us a sense of life.
Sure. I would say that Ukraine, during 2 years of full-scale war with Russia, already adapted quite a lot to this war and violence demonstrated by Russia almost every day. Luckily, Kiev is not a frontline city, and at least we don't have immediate artillery attacks, and we are not on the front line. So every day looks like in any other city in the world. People and businesses adapted to the extreme conditions in which we have to operate. There are some missiles attacks several times a week, but people live normal and businesses operate.
Even with missile attacks several times a week, people live normal.
Yeah, they just hide in the bomb shelters, but they don't change everyday life. They don't change their habits. They go to the offices, they go to restaurants, they go to the gym and train. They attend the movie theaters, museums, and enjoy life and try to live life as usual. Because I think all Ukrainians who stayed in Ukraine, they demonstrate commitment to Ukraine. We don't know how long the war would take, so we all decided not to stop the life, not to pause it, and to adapt as much as possible. Ukrainian GDP even grew by 3% last year. We even demonstrated growth of GDP during wartime.
And you work as a lawyer. Can a law firm still operate?
Yes, many law firms operate in Kiev on the ground because we support our local clients and international clients with a presence in Ukraine. So it's not unusual if businesses operate, which is also important because this is a mandatory condition to win the war with Russia. Then people working in the legal services industry, in the financial services industry should also support our clients and international partners supporting Ukraine on various fronts, on military front, financial front, humanitarian front, and others. This is essential to win the war together.
I can hear you and understand, but still logistically how it happens. We in Canada, had a huge backlog in our court system just because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're still trying to get through that backlog in the court system today. So are your courts still meeting and still reviewing cases?
Yes, sometimes courts are reviewing cases online and lawyers are allowed to participate in the hearings online. And sometimes it's a normal offline hearing, just like before the COVID and before the war. And also courts is not the only thing which needs to function in the country, because Ukraine still receives foreign investments in some industry sectors, which are key sectors for rebuilding Ukraine, for instance, defense. We have many foreign investments coming into defense sector, and especially defense tech. Even foreign companies say that if they do business in defense tech and they are not in Ukraine, then they do something not good enough, because Ukraine demonstrates now good examples of how defense technologies should develop further. So it's important to collect knowledge from the ground and to implement it into technical defense solutions.
That's interesting. So foreign companies are investing in Ukrainian companies that are manufacturing defense technology or developing defense technology, you're saying?
Yes, absolutely, including drones and strike drones and other technologies important for winning the war and reinstating peace in Europe.
What about natural resources? You know, Ukraine's thought of as one of the most countries in the world that's got natural resources. Are people, mining? Are they actually investing in new natural resources? What's happening in that sector?
Actually, it depends where those mines are, because of course activity is disrupted somewhat close to the front line, but far away from the front line everything operates as normal. Investments are limited, but they happen, because this is also key industry for rebuilding Ukraine. And normally, major companies, if they, for instance, had foreign debt towards international creditors, they try to restructure their indebtedness. I assisted, for instance, in 2023, Naftogaz, the biggest state supplier of gas in the country, which is a company of strategic importance, and it is really important for Ukrainian energy independence from Russia. So I assisted them with restructuring of $1.5 billion Eurobond indebtedness, and all foreign lenders and foreign holders of Eurobonds supported the restructuring, because they understand that extension of the debt was necessary to achieve strategic objectives of Naftogaz, of Ukraine, and again to create gas reserves and achieve independence from Russia, from Russian Federation. So there is a big understanding in the world, in democratic world, of what is going on in Ukraine, and Ukrainian companies, Ukrainian businesses, they have big support from US, Canada, Britain, and the EU.
What a fascinating, scary, but fascinating and frankly inspirational experience that you've had in doing these restructurings and being involved in these different organizations during the time of war. And yes, Kiev may not be at the front line, but with missile attacks several times a week, I can't imagine what life would be like, and what day-to-day going to business would be like, and going to restaurants would be like, and you say movie theaters even. It's just amazing. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with our guest, Yulia Kyrpa, a lawyer, a very successful lawyer in Kiev, Ukraine, talking about what's going on the ground for someone involved in business in the middle of a war. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Yulia Kyrpa, who is a lawyer in Kiev, Ukraine, and we're chatting about what life's like, what business is like, and some of the other organizations that she's involved in. We're going to touch on now, which is in regards to sort of the damage that's occurring in Ukraine. Yulia, you've got really quite an impressive background. You've got a degree from Duke University, FinTech Law and Policy, then a Master of Laws from National University of Kiev, and then a Master of Business Administration from the Edinburgh Business School. That's quite the background. You could get a job, anywhere in the world. You could be working in New York or London. Why go back to Kiev?
Thank you for this question. Actually, I think the impact I make in the world is the biggest in Kiev and in Ukraine. My knowledge, my skills, and the importance of my tasks and assignments is the most impactful here. It's much better than it would have been otherwise in London or New York. And in addition, in Ukraine, I think I have a feeling that I work on something of a higher order, some tasks and assignments which are bigger than myself or bigger than a certain business entity or organization. That's why I decided to make the biggest impact possible. And Ukraine needs support, needs legal expertise, justice has to be reinstated. So it was obvious decision that I should work here, contribute into Ukrainian economy, contribute into reinstatement of justice, and help Ukraine win the war.
You're the executive partner, head of finance and real estate with the AEQUO law firm, and you've been there for 9 years. That's a pretty senior position.
Thank you. Yes, the law firm is called EQUO, which means justice and fairness. It's a Latin word originally, which was then used by English language. And yes, we are celebrating 10-year anniversary in EQUO in the summer of 2024. So we really hope to celebrate it with the entire team in Kiev on the ground. And that's also a part of resilience of Ukrainians, because the law firm was established in 2014, right after Russia invaded into Ukraine first time. And now we are celebrating a 10th anniversary. So actually the entire lifetime of EQUO was somehow connected with the war, and the firm was operating during wartime, first during invasion in the east, and then during full-scale invasion for the last 2 years.
And you're also a board member of the organization called Register of Damage for Ukraine. Tell us about that. That's an organization out of The Hague, I understand?
Yes, that's a very new organization which represents under the Council of Europe. It's an international platform for cooperation of all countries who joined it already. Now 42 countries participating in the enlarged partial agreement on establishment of the Register of Damage, and the European Union. It is intended that more than 90 countries would join the Register of Damage caused by Russian aggression to Ukraine eventually. And the register is established to bring Russia to liability, to compensate the damage which Russia caused to Ukraine after the 24th of February 2024. So it's important, first of all, to compensate damages to Ukrainian people, businesses, and the state. But in addition, making Russia pay for the war is the way to finish the war sooner, and to create a global legal precedent so that other countries know that wars come at cost and don't start them later. That's why it's important overall from all three aspects: compensation, peace in the continent, and a good legal precedent for the future.
How are you going to do that? Obviously Russia's not going to voluntarily pay.
No, but I think there are already good developments in the Senate in the US, and the draft bill which would help arrest Russian assets is already supported by the Senate. So it's expected that it will become a law at some point in the future. US, Canada, Japan, and the EU already seized over 300 billion of Russian sovereign assets, and the total damage cost to Ukraine until now is $400 billion, according to the estimate made by the World Bank. So it's quite likely that eventually those assets will be transferred to Ukraine to finance the war, so that Western taxpayers don't have to pay for the war in Ukraine, and to compensate the damage which has been caused by now.
So this is interesting. You're saying that there's $300 billion of Russian assets that are in Western countries that have been, what you called it, arrested, so that they've been held here. These are assets owned by the Russian state or by Russian businesses, or both?
These are assets owned by Russian state, yes, and the total amount is $300 billion. Assets owned by businesses represent another thing. Perhaps it would be possible at some point in the future to arrest assets owned by businesses if those businesses are sanctioned. But right now we are talking about assets owned by Russia as a state, and they are already frozen. So now international community needs to create legal grounds to hand them over to Ukraine.
And you say that there's a bill in front of the U.S. Senate to do that, and Canada has our parliament in Canada done something in that regard?
Right now, I think US is at the forefront of legislative developments in that area. This draft bill is called Rebuilding Economic Prosperity and Opportunity for Ukrainians. So it's already official, and I hope Canada and other Western countries would follow those precedents at some point, because the coordination between democratic leaders is important to stop Putin within the borders of Ukraine, to help Ukraine win the war and keep the rest of democratic world safe.
How did you get involved in this organization, Register for Damage?
So the Register of Damage was created in 2023. The board was appointed in December, and we already had our first meeting in The Hague. Some countries who signed the enlarged partial agreement on establishment of the Register of Damage, they proposed their candidates, and there was a candidate from Ukraine. Ukraine made its own selection. So the first level of competition was held by the Ministry of Justice, when the Commission assessed previous experience, expertise, and positive business reputation, which has to be crystal clear, obviously. Then the second round of competition was made by the government, and the government approved two candidates, which also had to go through thorough examination. And the last but not least, there was a voting by the Council of Europe. Ukraine proposed two candidates, and I won as a result of this voting. The Council of Europe voted for me and my competitor from Ukraine, and I was chosen to represent Ukraine in the International Register of Damage. This is a very honorable role for me and a huge responsibility, which I appreciate, and I'm thankful for that. And now I'm working together with other board members to try and create a global precedent.
Congratulations. That does sound like a great honor. How do you actually assess the damage in Ukraine? Like, do you have like estimates of what it costs to replace buildings and factories and farms and airports and whatnot?
There are some international organizations which make assessment. As I said earlier, the World Bank made assessment, and according to their calculation, the amount of damage which happened until now is $400 billion. But as the war goes on, this amount increases every day, because Russia ruins our cities, our critical infrastructure, our plants and factories, and they kill people and they ruin the environment. So the amount of damage increases. So I think the idea is to register all types of damage which meet eligibility criteria according to the statute of the Register of Damage, and make Russia pay eventually for all types of damage they have caused. It would be good if Russians will be paying for their wrongdoings in Ukraine within the next generations also. Not only current generation should be liable, but future generations of Russians should also be contributing to cover the damage to Ukrainians. Perhaps that would teach all dictators not to start the wars, and it will teach population not to support dictatorships.
The pictures we've seen of Ukrainian cities are shocking. Do you think rebuilding is actually possible?
Rebuilding is possible, and it takes place in the cities which are not on the front line. I made several trips to the front line, to the eastern part in Ukraine, to Bakhmut and other cities where there are battles every day, because I needed to assist with establishment of PTSD cure center for the soldiers. So I was on front line myself several times, and I know how it looks like, not from the news, but from reality. You are absolutely right that cities are ruined completely, and some cities, they stopped existing because there is not a single building which was not bombed and destroyed by artillery attacks or missiles attacks. Those cities close to front line, they are not being rebuilt because they will be ruined once again. And it's not possible to rebuild anything under constant shelling. Cities which are not on the front line, they are being rebuilt within the course of the war. For instance, in Kiev, there were many buildings ruined, residential buildings, business centers, shopping malls, etc. And all of those ruined buildings have already been rebuilt.
They've already been rebuilt.
Yes, they have been rebuilt because it's essential if Ukraine participates in so draining, long standing war. It's important to rebuild our cities in parallel, not to allow the situation when major districts in the capital and in other cities would be ruined.
That's incredible. The amount of money that you're going to have to invest in the rebuilding of the infrastructure, the amount of construction workers, the amount of construction companies, it's almost daunting, isn't it?
Yeah, but luckily we have big interest from international investors to invest into critical infrastructure and to support Ukraine in its efforts aimed at rebuilding Ukraine. Right now, there are first good examples of insurance against war risks and political risks. And if foreign investors receive insurance, for instance, if their object is ruined by missiles or by artillery attacks, they get compensation by insurance companies.
I can't believe insurance companies are actually insuring against missile attacks. Seriously?
Yes, some of them do. And there are international organizations, for instance, MIGA. MIGA is one of examples. It was designed initially to insure objects against war risks and political risks. So MIGA already extended some insurances to Ukrainian businesses against missiles attacks. And now we are working in Ukraine to provide multiple instruments to foreign investors to give insurance, because this is again a mandatory condition for investment into the country. Ukraine has huge potential and huge need for investments, construction, infrastructure, projects, development, and so on. The only blocking factor is absence of insurance, but there are already positive developments in this area, and certain instruments are already available. Once there is a big amount of those interests, I think it would be interesting for foreign investors also to participate in rebuilding the country.
And I understand you've actually traveled to Toronto to be part of a conference on the rebuilding of Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yes, I actually spoke at Rebuild Ukraine conference in Toronto in November 2023. And there I was invited to discuss some public-private partnership opportunities with Canadian investors. So they are about the projects where both the Ukrainian state and the investor create a sort of a joint venture, and the state transfers certain object into the management of the investor, and the investor develops the project further, and there is a certain profit sharing element. So Canadian companies who attended the conference confirmed their intention to invest in Ukraine, including relying on public-private partnership instrument and to do some cooperation with the state of Ukraine in order to help rebuild the country and make profit. PPP is a good example in ports infrastructure, in railroads, in airport industry, and so on. So there is a big interest right now, and we hope it will increase gradually over time.
You know, it is interesting because it's probably obvious that there's going to be a big rebuilding opportunity and an investment opportunity, but yet there's got to be a lot of fear of missile attacks, of bombing, of what's going to happen with the war, how it impacts people personally, whether you could actually live a normal life, either coming to Ukraine and staying in a hotel or living in Kiev like you do. It's just mind-boggling to think about what life day to day in business or in life generally would be like. And so you're an inspiration that you've done so incredibly well, both in your legal profession as well as in your governmental organizational responsibilities with this organization, The Hague. So thank you for that contribution and for that inspiration. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Yulia Kyrpa, a lawyer from Kiev, Ukraine, talking about life in the middle of a war. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Yulia Kyrpa. She is a senior lawyer. She's the executive partner responsible for finance, and also sits on a damages board organized in The Hague. Lives and works in Kiev, Ukraine, and we're talking a little bit about some of the issues in regards to rebuilding of Ukraine, some of the investment opportunities, what life is like. But I wanted to turn to the personal. Yulia, I understand that your brother is on the front line. Tell me how you deal with that.
Yes, this is actually very hard because not everyone understands how painful and stressful it is to have your very close relative on the front line. My brother didn't have any previous experience in military. Moreover, he was released from the military duty 15 years ago while studying at the university. He had a so-called white ticket, which is an official document confirming the release from the military duty. So my brother, when the invasion started, he could have left Ukraine and work abroad and be in any country in the world right now. But he volunteered for the army, and several hours after the start of the full-scale invasion, around noon on the 24th of February 2022, I already saw him with the assault rifle and wearing a uniform. And he defended Kiev at the outskirts of Kiev when there was a risk of occupation of Kiev. Once the defense operation stopped successfully, he voluntarily went to the south of the country, to Kherson. Kherson was occupied and liberated in September 2022. So he participated in Kherson liberation as an infantry, as a soldier, just keeping the front line and not doing anything too advanced because he didn't have sufficient military experience. And then he learned how to operate drones and got transferred to the reconnaissance unit and became an operator of the observation drone first, and then with the assistance of my close network, friends, business partners, he got several drones, got more experience, went through several trainings arranged by USA and UK in Ukraine on the ground, and now he's a strike drone operator, which is a very responsible position, and a platoon commander. And all of that happened within 2 years. He came without any military experience at all and had the lowest rank, the lowest responsibility in the army, successfully participated in several liberating operations, and now he is doing a very important task, operating strike drones and being in charge of other people, including his platoon, which is also a very inspiring story in my view, because it demonstrates how amazing Ukrainian armed forces are, and all those results which the whole world saw on the front line in Ukraine, they are mostly achieved by non-professional soldiers, by amateurs who didn't have any experience, who volunteered for the army and learned everything on the ground because they have patriotism and Ukraine in their hearts.
How often do you speak with them? Do you talk to
Sorry?
them? How often do you speak with them? Can you communicate with them?
Yeah, I exchange messages with him every day to make sure that he is alive. So I exchange messages, and when there is an opportunity, we try to call each other. But I keep contact with him every day. I made several big fundraising events, and managed to attract a lot of funds from businesses and individuals for the army. I constantly assist with supplies to the front line, and I support them, and my close network friends and partners support them with equipment, uniform, even drones. We buy everything we can. We also bought several cars in the UK and delivered them to Ukraine. So this is an everyday duty. And in Ukraine, all regular people participate in donations to the army. This became a habit for all Ukrainians because, due to the efforts of my brother and people like my brother, Ukraine still exists as a country. Of course, there is a lot of support from foreign donors, from foreign countries, from the sponsors. We receive military aid, weapons, equipment, but still some people have to go and put their lives at stake. Without a big patriotism and big efforts and lack of fear of people who put their lives at stake, it would not be possible to keep Ukraine and to keep fighting against Putin, to keep our country in the game for so long.
You know, it really is an inspirational story. So thank you for sharing that personal, your story of your brother, because I think that a lot of us think about the money and about the armaments, but don't realize, as well as we should, the impact on people. And your brother is an incredible example, and you must know lots of others as well that have had similar experiences of being an amateur and volunteering. What do you think it is that has created a situation where we thought that, in February of 2022, Russia was going to be able to march into downtown Kiev and take over Ukraine in a week or two? What was it that enabled Ukraine to stop the big Russian army?
Yes, absolutely. Occupation of Kiev was quite possible in February 2022 because Russian troops were stopped 40 kilometers away from Kiev. Only 40 kilometers. It looked very real that Kiev would be occupied at that time. I think amazing efforts of Ukrainians, both those people who decided to defend our city on the outskirts, professional soldiers, amateurs, volunteers, and people who supported the frontline soldiers with everything they needed: ammunition, medication, food, transportation. The entire city and the entire country, I think, demonstrated huge level of self-organization. The government and state authorities did not have time to organize people and to give instructions because this full-scale invasion came out of a sudden. So people, they got organized themselves. And that's why it was possible to avoid occupation of Kiev, not to allow Russian troops into Kiev downtown, and then start liberating other cities. Kharkiv in the east, Kherson in the south, and so on and so on.
We've heard horrific stories of murder, of rape, of torture. Do you believe them? Are they real?
They are absolutely real. Unfortunately, I also lost many of my friends and close acquaintances at war, or some of them were murdered. Even being civilians, they were murdered in the suburbs of Kiev. So they are very real, and everything that is showed on the TV and explained on the internet, unfortunately, all of this is very real and represents the reality, which is quite hard to understand how those horrific stories and so big violence, especially against civilians, including women and children, can happen in the middle of Europe in the 21st century.
It's amazing. Now, again, you've got a law degree, you've got a business degree from international, institutions. You could work anywhere, and just 40 miles to your north, we're hearing stories of rape and torture. Aren't you scared? Why are you still there?
I was scared initially, and as my law firm worked against Gazprom in the past, which is the biggest Russian company, we won a huge arbitration against Gazprom. My life was also in danger. So first 3 months I spent outside Ukraine because I was really in danger and they needed to work efficiently to support my clients and my team. But then I returned back to Kiev 3 months later when the risk of occupation was no longer there. Then I adapted to life, to doing business, to supporting my team and my colleagues. But for the first 3 months, I couldn't be in Kiev because of my professional risks associated with my previous activity against Russia and winning big court disputes against major Russian companies.
We've heard lots of military and political experts talk about how this war started, why it started, and what's going to happen. But you're right there, very smart lawyer. Why do you think this war happened, and what do you think is going to happen now?
The reason why the war happened initially is because, first of all, the West tolerated Putin way too long. The history teaches us that actually the West and democratic countries should not try and please dictators, making deals with them, doing some bargain about price of natural resources, because before there was a view that pleasing a dictator creates peace. But it is not correct view. Pleasing a dictator creates wars, violence, and unrest. No dictatorship, no threats in the world should be tolerated. And of course, as Putin saw all this tolerance from the West way too long, he also understood that he could do whatever he wants. He didn't want to see Ukraine developing towards EU, getting integrated with the EU, going towards NATO membership. He couldn't afford successful Ukraine, and before the war, Ukraine was on its upward path of development, because in Russia, regime and lifestyle and standards of life for people are totally different. So Putin could not afford having successful Ukraine, democratic Ukraine, being integrated to the West next to Russia, as an example how well people could do and what it means to live in the free and democratic world. That's why he invaded Ukraine, to show that other countries who used to be in the former Soviet Union and represent this Eastern Bloc, they actually don't have a choice and they cannot just choose which direction to develop, the European one or Russian direction.
If
So he does not respect our freedom of choice, and he showed that despite Ukrainian population voted for joining the EU back in 2013, and we signed the association agreement with the EU, and now we are a member candidate, he actually showed that Russia would not accept it and would not tolerate. They don't want to have any democratic countries next to them, especially those ones who used to belong to the same big country, which was called Soviet Union.
So appeasement is a mistake. And we learned it with Chamberlain during or before World War II, and we're learning it all over again with Putin. And so you think that the West should have taken a far harder stance in 2014 when Russia invaded the eastern part of Ukraine?
Absolutely. That's my understanding of the situation, especially as before 1991, Ukraine had second largest in the world nuclear power potential. And we gave away all our nuclear weapons to Russia as the West requested in exchange of so-called Budapest Memorandum. And Budapest Memorandum provided Ukraine with security guarantees from USA, UK, and Europe. So we gave away our nuclear weapons and expected security guarantees in return, which were prescribed by the Budapest Memorandum. But when Putin invaded first time in 2014, nobody did anything. And Western countries, instead of helping Ukraine win the war, which took place only in the East at that time, did not do anything essential. They were afraid. They again tried to please a dictator. They sort of forced Ukraine to have so-called peace negotiations with Russia, which were breached by Putin several times. And all ceasefire agreements were breached by him multiple times before 2014 and 2022. And in 2022, he decided to have a full-scale invasion. The time to stop Putin is not now. The time to stop Putin actually was in 2014. But as his invasion in Ukraine didn't get a strong and unanimous, well-coordinated response from the West, it eventually led to the full-scale war in Ukraine. And if he is not stopped in the borders of Ukraine anytime soon, Ukraine will not be the last, unfortunately.
Seriously? You think Ukraine won't be the last? So do you think that he'll invade the Baltics if Ukraine falls?
Absolutely. I'm
Absolutely.
confident that this would happen. He already threats the Baltics, he threats Poland. If Putin is not stopped within the borders of Ukraine, other countries would be in danger as well. And that's why the Western world cannot afford being afraid of him and of Russia anymore. First of all, I think Ukrainian armed forces, and Ukraine is such a small country compared to Russia, already proved that Russia shouldn't be afraid of. Secondly, being afraid of the dictator and trying to please him would only create more wars and more violence. It's quite hard to say that Putin should be stopped within the borders of Ukraine, and we need to keep the war within the borders of Ukraine because Ukraine is my native country. I live here, my family, my colleagues are here, but it is really essential to coordinate the efforts of the entire democratic world and stop the Putin within the borders of Ukraine. Otherwise, at some point, there would be no safe place in Europe and other countries will be in danger.
Strong words, but I agree with you. Yulia Kyrpa, thank you so much for that conclusion and your lessons learned. We're going to take a final break and come back with some final short concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Really powerful interview tonight, I think, with Yulia Kyrpa, who is a lawyer in downtown Kiev, Ukraine, and she's just given us a passionate rationale for why appeasement doesn't work, and you need to stand up to dictators, you need to stand up to bullies, and that if Putin is not stopped now, we should have been stopped in 2014, but if he's not stopped now, he won't stop, and he'll continue. Yulia believes, I believe, into the Baltics, Poland, etc. And I really firmly agree with Yulia that the only way to stand up to a bully is to stand up. You cannot appease, you cannot give in, you cannot negotiate. And I've learned that in business, and I've learned that in personal life, and I think we're learning that in geopolitics and war right now. Yulia, how does this war end? How do you think it possibly ends? It's been going on for 3 years.
Yeah, it has been going on for nearly 2 years by now. I think the only way to win the war is through a political dialogue, and there is no other way, because even if the entire territory of Ukraine is liberated, Russia would still keep firing missiles at Ukraine. And so this would not be viewed as the end of the war, because Ukraine would still be under constant artillery and missiles attacks. So the war could only end if the entire Western world and Ukraine creates a huge pain for Russia. If the Western world imposes sanctions, if Russia starts feeling huge economic losses, if their economy starts collapsing, and if frozen assets are transferred to Ukraine, they would help to finance the war, to recover damages caused to Ukraine, and they would also show Russia that all the assets abroad, both sovereign assets and private assets of sanctioned businesses and people, will be under threat. That's the only way. So we need sanctions and joint efforts in enforcing sanctions, so that they don't remain on paper, but actually enforced by all countries against Russia as a state, Russian businesses and Russian people. And we need frozen assets to be transferred to Ukraine. That would perhaps help to achieve political negotiations and the ceasefire through a political way.
Yulia, you have thousands of people in Toronto, Canada listening to you right now. What would you like to say to them?
I would like to tell them that we are very grateful for their support, which we have received already and keep receiving. I hope that Ukrainians demonstrate that we are not afraid, that we are resilient, and we are protecting Ukraine and the rest of the world, the democratic world, with our lives. And we will keep fighting as long as it takes until we win together with our foreign partners and friends and everyone who is supporting us. Thank you for that. We will never surrender. Thank you for supporting us.
Yulia, thank you so much. You are resilient. You are inspirational, both as a country and as a people, but also personally, just you. And so thank you very much for speaking with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure was all mine.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock. 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from, frankly, Kiev, Ukraine, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and video casts are available after they're on the radio on my website, briancrombie.com, on podcast services, and on social media. Thanks. Good night, everyone. Yulia, all the best.